Welcome to Paranormal M, where we bring the eerie and unexplained to your ears. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for your regular dose of supernatural thrills. Get ready to be spooked. 2017 Ghost Story. So back in 2017 we bought a Ouija board. Well, not exactly. I was 11 years old at the time and I was obsessed with the paranormal. My mother was always skeptical of that stuff. She wasn't purely Christian, but she does believe in God and evil spirits. So I basically convinced her. Convinced her to buy a Ouija board. The one that we bought was actually just a piece of cloth with a Ouija board design on it. I didn't really want to buy it at first, because I was afraid that it wouldn't really work the way a normal one would. But my mom bought it anyway, saying that it would work like a normal one. So months passed and we never used it. It just hung up in my room. But I did have a weird experience after we bought it. So it was about a couple of months after we bought it and I was woken up at 5 a.m. Even though it was dark out, I got up anyway, turned on the TV. I was just sitting in the living room watching the show Adventure Time when I suddenly saw something out of the corner of my eye. I saw a black shadow figure darted from the living room where I was into the hallway. It was the hallway that led to my mother's room and my room. That's where my sister was sleeping. They were in second grade at that time. When I turned around, of course there's nothing there. I brushed it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. But after what happened next, though, I don't think that was the case. Again, let's fast forward a couple of months later. Me and my sister just got home from school and her mom told us some shocking things. She told us that she was experiencing some bizarre things herself. Things like her thumb going numb randomly for no reason at all, the radio and TV malfunctioning, and her pet birds acting completely nuts like there was something else in the apartment. I was shocked by this news, but also kind of excited at the same time because I got to experience paranormal activity. But things sort of escalated that night. Later that night, my sister was too afraid to sleep in her room. We both shared a room. That was because she swore that she saw a figure in there that resembled Slender Man. I was pretty skeptical because even though I believed in ghosts, I didn't believe in Slender Man. But I was still pretty scared anyway. Later, my mom told me that, my sister and I were going outside to take her dog named Sophie on a walk. I was scared to stay, but I stayed anyway. I tried to take my mind off any spirits that might be in her house. All was well, but then my walkie-talkie was sitting right next to me and suddenly turned on and scared me half to death. The voice coming from the walkie-talkie was male, but because of the terrible audio quality, I couldn't understand him. Ran out of the apartment and down to my mom and sister and told them what happened. My mom said it could have just been railroad workers because there was a railroad next door to her apartment. Sometimes they'd be up there working. But this was in the middle of, the night, so there weren't any workers. My mom was still skeptical. But when we got back to her apartment, the TV was frozen. The screen was glitched. I woke up that night at 2 a.m., decided to go to sleep in my mom's room. My sister was already there because she woke up before me. That's when we heard the sounds. That night, me, my sisters, and my mom heard the sounds of footsteps in the hallway. Like movie cases falling off her shelf in the living room and pots and pans in the kitchen. Couldn't have been our pets because our cat and dog were in the room with us. Our birds were sleeping in their cage. It wasn't a person. Our apartment door automatically locks when closed. Can't even be opened without our key. And that was with us. The only other way in was through our windows, where you would have to climb up a 4-foot building to get to it. Another thing we heard that night was like my walkie-talkie. Turned on again, that same male voice speaking through it. And after that night, some things went back to normal. Others didn't. One night, I had to sleep in my mom's room for the rest of the time that we lived there, because any time I slept in my room, I would always wake up at 2 a.m. Never fall asleep for the rest of the night after. My little sister kept claiming that she saw shadow figures even after we moved into a new house. Like she would still see them. It wasn't until early 2019 when she stopped seeing them. I'm now 14 in 8th grade going into 9th grade. My sister's now 11 and going to 6th grade. My mom threw away the Ouija board after that. Said that she's never buying one again. It came at 2 a.m. This happened back in 2017. I've posted this story on Reddit before about a year ago, but I left out some pretty important things and details. So I'm reposting this on a different subreddit with more information. I was about 11 years old when this happened. I was living in an old apartment building in Spokane, Washington, or Spokane. That was with my mom and little sister. They were in 2nd grade at the time, and I've always been obsessed with the paranormal. I would spend my time on YouTube listening to ghost stories and things like that. It was during the Halloween season, so we decided to go to Spirit Halloween, which is something we pretty much did every year. We decided to buy this tablecloth that had like a printing of a Ouija board on it. Well, I'd always wanted a Ouija board. My mom's kind of religious, so she was pretty hesitant. Since this wasn't a real Ouija board, my mom decided to buy it anyway. I still planned to try and play with it, see if I could summon something. I never really got around to it, so we just ended up hanging it up in my room, and that was it for a while. A few months later, I decided to get up early and into the living room to watch cartoons. It was still dark outside, my mom and sister were asleep, and all was well. Till the reader got deja vu and thought it was like a slightly different retelling of it, but I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same retelling of it. And yet I persevere. I instantly spun around and faced the direction where I saw the figure. Of course there's nothing there, so I shrugged it off, thought I could have just been seeing things in the dark. Fast forward again about a month later, and that's when things started to kind of go down. Me and my sister got from school, and that's when my mom starts to tell us strange things were happening in our apartment, such as her thump randomly going numb. Okay, last time it said thumb. So, I wasn't really scared at first. In fact, I was kind of excited. I always dreamt of having a paranormal encounter, and now it's finally happening. But as soon as I would learn that the paranormal is no laughing matter, it isn't something to be all that excited about. That evening, things got even stranger. My mom said that her and my sister were going to go take her dog Sophie on a walk, so I said I wanted to stay behind and see if anything paranormal would happen. My mom seemed to be okay with it. After that, I sort of left her apartment alone, sitting there again watching the show Adventure Time on her TV. Suddenly, my walkie-talkie was sitting right next to me, and it sprang to life. It used a man's voice beginning to talk from the other end. It scared the shit out of me. I instantly ran outside to meet up with my mom and sister to tell them all what happened. She said it could have just been on the same channel as someone else. Plus, we live right next to it like a railroad, and sometimes there'll be workers up there with radios. But that didn't make any sense. First off, you could clearly see the radio outside, or railroad. If there's nobody out there, well, my walkie-talkie had been turned off, so I have no idea how it could have just been randomly turned on like that out of nowhere. When I got back up to the apartment, the TV was all distorted. Pet birds were going nuts. Not long after that, I started to get an extreme pain building up in my chest. I don't know how to describe the pain, but it felt somewhat like something was pressing hard against my chest. That same evening, my sister ran out of her room. By the way, we shared a room. She said that she saw a faceless man standing in the room, but when we looked in there's nothing there. She described the man as completely faceless, having no eyes, nose, or mouth. She was too scared to go back into her room, and I started to get a bit spooked as well. Soon my mom was able to convince her everything was fine. She was able to go to sleep. That night I woke up at 2 a.m. Whenever me and my sister would wake up in the night, we'd go into my mom's room and sleep there. My sister had woken up before me, because she was already in there, so I went and joined them. All three of us were awake and tried to go to sleep. But then that's when things got started. Well, we could hear what sounded like footsteps in our house. They were in the kitchen and the living room. We also had a huge shelf of movies in the living room, and it sounded like somebody was pulling them off the shelf. On top of all this, we could hear pots and pans in the kitchen and my walkie-talkie in the living room. That was the same man speaking through it. I don't know what the man's voice was saying, but I could clearly hear someone talking. I don't know exactly how long this went on, but it felt like at least an hour or more. It couldn't have been our dog or our cat making the noise, since they were both in the room with us. Our birds were locked in a cage. The next morning, pretty much everything went back to normal. That was the last time we heard those noises, and nothing else strange really happened. And what was weird was, despite the noises, nothing seemed to be out of place. None of our movie cases were scattered or anything like that. But I knew it wasn't simply a dream, like my sister remembers it too. Soon after, my mom threw the Ouija tablecloth thing in the trash. Refused to buy anything else like it to this day. But after that incident, there's two things that occurred related to it. Every night after that, I would always wake up at 2 a.m., but only if I slept in my room. So would my sister. It was always at the same time or around the same time for some weird reason, I don't know. This didn't seem to affect my mother at all, though, who never really had that problem. Only seemed to affect us kids. My sister didn't stop seeing that faceless man for at least another 2 years. That was even after we moved from that apartment. She would see him in dark corridors or rooms, but would always be gone after she looked away. She doesn't see him anymore, though. Thankfully, I've been able to sleep better without waking up every night. But I still think about this incident sometimes. I've had people say to me before that it could have just been a bear or a person or something else, but there's no way it could have been a bear since we're living in the middle of downtown Spokane in a 4-story apartment. We were living on the 4th story. The only way of our apartment is through the door, which instantly locks when it's closed and needs a key to be opened, which my mom had on pretty much all the time. You couldn't climb through the windows without breaking them. You'd have to scale the side of the building to the 4th floor. So this is also why it couldn't have been a person. But all I know is we didn't just imagine this. Something has to be done there. Shit got weird before we moved. So just for context, my boyfriend had been living in our old place for about 10 years. Then I moved in and lived there for about 5. I always felt a presence in this house, but over time, whatever it was targeted me over my boyfriend. If he's asking me shit over my headphones, when I'd ask my boyfriend what I was talking about, he'd have no idea what I was talking about. I used to have a lot of sleep paralysis in our bedroom. I'm talking being sexually assaulted by someone or something unseen. There was one night where I was petrified in the bedroom, so much so that I moved to the lounge room to sleep because of it. The spare room had some weird energy. We had a camera set up in there while we were just sort of kitten sitting for a mate. And we also had 2 cats, and apparently it was better to let them get to know different events before, so we commingled them so we could have the lounge room door shut between them initially. But anyway, back to the camera. My boyfriend said that once he thought he'd seen static-like figures walking across the screen in the spare room. So there was things like that. That all came to a head and we started packing to move to another property. During the final 2 or 3 days before we left, I started having the sleep paralysis again. It had rarely happened since, and, well, once again I was being sexually assaulted and violently choked. I was pushed and scratched, and I have a massive scar down my arm now. The cat started, hissing at random empty spots, and tempers were flaring. I'm sorry that this was stress from moving being realistic. The final night we had mostly gotten all the big stuff out, but really had some of the sort of leftover bits and pieces to do. We were both starving, so we decided to order pizza. While we were waiting for my boyfriend, he had a shower. During that time I heard a fucking loud moan. Now the house was pretty much empty, so the sound reverberated off the walls. I thought maybe it was my boyfriend in the shower, so when he came out I made him try and replicate the moan in the shower. With water running to try and debunk it. He did, and that was not the sound I heard. I asked him to make a moaning sound in the lounge and kitchen, where I was. He did it. It wasn't the same moan I heard, but it captured the exact pitch. So that weirded me out. A couple of hours later, we were making a final trip to the van before shutting the door for the night, and we both heard, like, canned laughter. Some kind of talking from a TV show in the distance. It's 3 a.m. by this stage, and I guarantee no one was watching anything that early, especially that loudly in the morning. And as soon as it started, it stopped. Like, stopped once we moved away from the house. I'd run back in one final time and it started and stopped again. Is this normal? Is this good? Or is this bad? So this has been going on since as long as I can remember. I've always seen shadow people creeping around corners behind people and close and far. Sometimes that would make me feel absolutely terrified to the bone, and sometimes I felt perfectly safe. We used to be a really religious family. I remember learning about angels and demons at church and how everybody had a guardian angel. I rationalized the shadow people as this. One would pop up, stand in the doorway, and another would pop up behind or in front or next to it. I would assume that my guardian angel was protecting me from some demon. Fast forward now, and it only gets more frequent. They're clear as day. I can stare at them for up to 30 seconds before they leave. They'll only be on one side of the counter, and when I look at them, they duck down and hide. Same thing behind the couch and some doorways. Sometimes it's only a head, and sometimes it's the whole body in all different sizes. They watch me. I've always felt like I'm being watched. I have a friend who said that he never had experienced anything like this. That was till he met me. I once randomly asked if he ever seen anything at my house. He said yes. He told me when I would go to the shower, something would dash after me from my room to the hallway where the shower was. He said after seeing this stuff, he started noticing it at his house. After telling one of my older sisters, they're 32 years old, she admitted that she's always seen stuff like this. But the last time she was at my house, she'd seen something crouching almost. It was behind her. So she went to go look behind her and got up and ran. But it, looked at her, had these horrifying, pure white eyes. She's never seen anything with eyes like that, so she refuses to come to my house and basically sages everything and, well, I've had things thrown in the direction of me, including broken glass too. These are just some examples. I don't know if it's related, but my other sister's been having these dreams about this woman wanting to take her baby while she was only 3 months old. It's actually how she found out she was having a daughter. I had a dream a few months ago. Horribly vivid. I don't get nightmares, really, but I can recount the absolute dread I felt when that thing came in the house after my sister let it in. My sister was blank-faced. I was directly behind her with her face over her shoulder. She wanted my niece and nephew. I wouldn't let her take them. She wouldn't touch me wouldn't really touch me or them. She got my sister to grab them, and when I went to go grab them back to my sister, she immediately dropped her grip on them like she had no power. I told my sister later on to describe to her and my sister, that we've been dreaming this. 12 years of the same thing. Is this bad that I see shadow people? Could the two separate things be connected? What should I do? Working at a nursing home is terrifying. I'm a 26-year-old student going to university studying veterinary medicine. I was struggling financially, and when COVID-19 hit my country, I decided that I needed to find a job. I got a job at a nursing home. I do the night shift, from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. When I first started, I didn't notice anything strange, but as time goes by, I'm feeling more and more uneasy. The first thing I noticed was the hand dryers in the common bathrooms going off for no reason. only for like a few seconds, 2 to 3 seconds tops. I thought, okay, that's weird, but oh well. The next thing that really happened directly to me, not to my gecko, was really terrifying. I was downstairs, and mind you, this is a 150-year-old institution. It's an old house, despite the work they did here. There's 3 floors. The hand dryer from downstairs is the most active one. So I was there alone. I had my phone in my jacket pocket. I was walking around going to the coffee machine, and all of a sudden my phone gets yanked from my pocket. Smashed against the floor. Picked it up and opened out of there like, fuck this shit. The screen broke. Also, once in a while, one of the emergency bells, like the ones the elder just sort of press when in trouble in the bathroom, it goes off. We panic because it's really a loud ring and different ones in different rooms, and it usually means that someone's in trouble in the bathroom. Usually they fall on the floor. So we rush there all at the same time. There's no one in the bathroom. One night I was dozing to sleep for a while. I opened my eyes and I saw a dark male figure sitting in the room across from me just watching me. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Closed my eyes and fell asleep. This one happened yesterday night. The most terrifying by far. I was feeling tired, so I went to the room next to the nurse's office. There's some long chairs there, so I thought I was going to have a lay down for a little bit. When I got there, I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me. But I thought, hey, stop being crazy, it's all in your head, so I tried to doze to sleep, and I do. It was a very light sleep. Then, like 20 minutes in, I woke up, the chair was shaking uncontrollably. Got up and fell. Thought it was an earthquake. Ran to the other room where my colleagues were and asked, did you fucking feel the earth shaking? They were confused and said no. You're probably dreaming, and laughed it off. But I know what it felt, and it terrifies me. The Light Bridge. About a year ago, I would come off at work sometimes around 1 or 2 in the morning. The shift time fluctuated. I didn't notice at first, but when I did, I couldn't find any way to explain it. So I've come here for answers. As I merged into the freeway off my work, the first overpass I approached had what seemed to be a beam of light shining on the bridge. Now this by itself is nothing to be wary of. It could be a pedestrian with a flashlight or a car's headlights. What got me skeptical was how it behaved once I approached. It would disappear. You know those moments in your life when you see or you hear something that you can't quite explain, but it only happens one time, so you sort of delete it from your memory. This was different. This was consistent. Once I noticed, it was hard not to see this happen every single night, like a mysterious-looking light flashing away. It would flash away once I, and only I, drove underneath it. I looked into some research to see what this possibly could be, and every time I offered an explanation, I was shut down. A car or a person's lights was far too narrow, straight, and bright to be a light like that. A train or a tram passing by real fast. The overpass was just a regular 4-lane bridge. Scientific experiment. Well, there's no consistent time, and this is happening early in the morning, and well, I don't really know. Maybe triggering a pressure plate. Think there were other cars on the road, just mine would cause the light to vanish? Maybe car light reflection on the rail as I pass by. Like I said, there were other cars on the freeway, and the nature of the light source couldn't possibly be caused by a car's headlights. As I had exhausted all my solutions, I came to the conclusion that it must be a hallucination. It was a new schedule for me. I usually sleep early, but now my body's still going at 2 in the morning. So it must simply be that I'm fatigued to the point that I'm imagining things. That was till I got video proof. I showed it to my sisters just to see, make sure I wasn't hallucinating the video too. I swear these have been messed with. They haven't. At least other than cropping for file size. I can't wrap my head around it, and I don't understand what happened there. And for the record, I only worked there for a couple of months and left in March of 2019. I've got no clue what this could be anymore. I don't believe in the paranormal, but this might be one time I make an exception. What is this? Great-grandfather visited me. This occurred while my grandmother was in home hospice for dementia. This was sometime between losing her ability to walk and not understanding conversation. To put into some perspective, my grandmother's in a room towards the back of the house, while my bedroom's closer to the front. The kitchen's toward the front of the house as well, so there's a decent space between my grandmother's room, my bedroom, and the kitchen. I was laying in bed one night. I was hearing deep breathing. I have a dog, and I thought maybe he was snoring or having difficulties breathing. But it wasn't coming from where he was, which was in my grandmother's room. I return, lights are turned off, and I hear that breathing again. Hold my breath, and the breathing continues. That's it. Freaked me out enough to turn the lights on. I said a full rosary and had a really uneasy sleep. The next morning, I whispered to my mom what happened in the kitchen. I don't remember her reaction other than telling me I needed to tell it to go away. I go with my mom to my grandmother's room to help bathe and feed her. At some point she apologizes to me. She said that her father just wanted to look at me and he didn't mean to scare me. That's it. Really minor visitation. Towards the end of my grandmother's life, there were more visits from her relatives and friends. There were sometimes shadows, even geckos. You'd get a feeling of not being alone. Never felt scary, but beyond that first surprise at least. I think when she died, her father took her away. Wiccan stepmother summoned something in the hotel room. First of all, as the title suggests, my SM is Wiccan, and regularly practices witchcraft. Stepmother. When I was younger, she would often practice her craft in the basement and cast spells on me and other family members. This was one of those times. We were in the hotel in St. Louis, Missouri. That was for a family vacation. After a long day of swimming and other outdoor activity, we turned into the hotel for the night. My little sister and I were in one bed. My elder brother in the recliner and my father and... why do I keep forgetting that? Stepmother. That's not even hard. My little sister and I were in one bed, my elder brother in the recliner, my father and stepmother in my other bed. Just as we were getting to bed, my stepmother got up and left the room, saying that she was checking out something. When she returned, she had far too familiar, like this sort of look on her face. We knew she had done some sort of ritual while out of the room. She always got a sort of wild look when she did witchcraft, but to be fair, she often did drugs while practicing as well. So that may have been it too. That's not a good combination. So, we're all settled into bed without much of a word. Now my little sister's always insisting on bringing a nightlight whenever she's staying in a hotel. And as you can imagine, for having a literal witch of a mother, she wasn't a big fan of the dark. I was laying in bed listening to everybody else snore away when I noticed some movement on the ceiling. This is where things get paranormal. Despite the nightlight, there was a shadow splayed across the ceiling. It was a humanoid figure. My body told me it was definitely human, or maybe inhuman. The shadow's feet, we're going to call them, they sprouted from the top of the door, with legs and a body protruding into the room, culminating into a head a few feet from the bed. It was completely motionless, almost seemed to be made of smoke. That was as this image shifted slightly as I looked in horror. My fear only grew as I realized that despite the impossibility, the shadow had 2 eye holes, and I could tell it was looking straight at me. I began to shiver in fear, wanting to scream, but afraid to do so. Then I heard shuffling across the room. My elder brother, evidently uncomfortable in his sleeping arrangements, had gotten up to use the restroom. I walked across the room, and the nightlight now cast his shadow across the ceiling as well. As he walked, his head shadow got closer to the other shadow's own head. When that finally met, the shadow instantly snaked across the ceiling, almost like it was melting. Went back to the door and then out of the room. My brother, too busy trying not to trip on his way to use the bathroom, took no notice of me or the shadow. He did his business, then returned to his chair. Too scared to sleep, I laid staring at the ceiling for what seemed like hours until at some point I just passed out. I only woke up after being shaken awake by my father. Spent the rest of the day watching over my back, just staying out of the shadows. That night shook me to my absolute core. And to this day, I'm wary of shadows in the dark. Tend to stay away from basements. Feel even more sorry for my little sister, who had to live with her for many more years. If anybody'd like to hear more about my crazy, wicked stepmother, just let me know. The Balloon. Happy haunting. For years, I've worked at a small grocery store in the American Midwest as an overnight stocker and weekend manager. The business has been family-owned for generations. My family's been intertwined, completely separate and divorced from interviewed. But we have been intertwined with them since the beginning. The owners became close friends with my family. We'd often come to gatherings and such to visit. The owner at the time, the father of the current owner, was a kind man who spent most of his 30-ish years of ownership at the store working maybe 10 or 12 hours a day. He was sort of a grandfather figure to me, many others too. And when he passed in 2010, we were all heartbroken. A few years after the owner, who I'll refer to as Bob, passed away, I finally got a job working at the store. Since my family was close to the owners, I quickly moved up the ranks to overnight worker, and eventually to weekend manager. Over the years, me and the other employees noticed certain odd things happening in early morning hours between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Usually. Things would inexplicably fall from shelves, automatic doors would open for nobody, and the motion-activated lottery machines would go off even though no one was there. After a while, we suspected some sort of paranormal activity and reported it to the current owner. He simply said, "That must be Bob." Most of the time, these occurrences were harmless, likely because Bob didn't want any harm to come to the store his family had owned and operated for generations. He also never revealed himself to a customer. Not that we've ever had a reported one, at least. I'd never had any direct encounter, only seen on cameras or heard from coworkers, until, that is, the night of the balloon. As an overnight stalker, I would work pretty short on, closing shortly after opening. Next morning, I usually work at 10 to 6. This meant that the only people in the store for most of the shift were me and my other two coworkers. It just so happened on this night that the grocery truck was rather small, so we got all the groceries stocked up by 3 a.m., just had the dairy products left. My coworkers, not really obligated to stay for anything other than the grocery stock, probably left, so by 3:30 I was completely alone. As I filled the shelves with cheese, milk, and various other dairy products, my mind began to wander. Suddenly a face appeared in my mind, clear. I thought I'd seen it that day. It was the face of Bob, wearing a big smile he had always had, even after a long day. I became a little sad thinking about him, so I decided to take a quick break and get a drink. Finished the box I had, and I made my way to the end of the aisle. As I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. An icy cold spot hit my chest. I looked around and laid eyes on a balloon floating up chest height a few feet away. Written on the balloon were 2 words: "Thank you," in bright letters. I was completely frozen. I was stuck to the spot. The balloon had no business being on this side of the store. I was in the opposite corner of the building. No draft would have carried it there. After a minute or so, I unglued myself from the floor and carefully walked around the balloon toward the back room. I went to the back office, checked the cameras, ensured the balloon did in fact exist, only to find it slowly floating down the dairy aisle. "Okay, Bob," I said with a slight grin. "I'll get it finished before I go." With that, I returned to the aisle, the balloon floating a few feet away, and worked for another hour or so to finish. Once I was done, I grabbed the balloon, carried it back to our floral department, and deflated it. Laid it flat on the desk and left a note for the worker who would open in the morning. One of Bob's granddaughters. From Bob. The Smoking Visitor. My grandfather was a man who smoked more than any man I've ever seen. Cigarettes, cigars, home-rolled, it didn't matter, he smoked it. He was never really into chewing tobacco or patches, and he heavily favored cigars over anything else. There was a particular brand that he would smoke. I don't recall exactly what it was, but he would carry them around with him like a specially carved metal case. He'd smoke them almost all day. He worked a stressful job in the government for most of his working years, which is where he obtained his habit. After he retired, it sort of stuck around until the day he died. I was very little when he passed away, less than 10 years old. I can still remember the smell of those cigars he would smoke. Not that I liked the smell, in fact I hated smoking, but it was such a distinct scent that it only ever meant one thing. Grandpa's here. Even years after he died, my grandmother especially would claim to have visits with Grandpa, saying that they would sit and chat for hours. I always assumed this was just her way of dealing with grief, imagining that he was still there and having a long conversation with him. She would often complain about the smell of cigars that he left after he disappeared again, saying that it would hang in the air for hours. It wasn't long before other family members began to have similar experiences. First my mother, then my stepfather, then my uncle. The story was always the same. They'd be alone in the house or the car, and suddenly the smell of those cigars would fill the room, and black out every other scent. It would get cold, even in the summer. My mom even said she would hear him coughing as though he were in the walls or above in the ceiling. She told me that one day he would just come pay me a visit, and I would know by the smell that followed him even beyond the grave. It wasn't long before she was proven right. My family and I just took a road trip down Route 66 to Las Vegas. That's where we'd be staying for the week. I was 16 at the time and hadn't heard anything more about my grandfather for some time. I thought perhaps he had finished whatever business he had on Earth and had finally passed on. Turned out I was wrong. Well, we were in New Mexico a little more than 3 days into our drive, and it was like a blisteringly hot day. It was over 100 degrees, not a cloud in sight. It was just me, my mother, and my stepfather in the car, blue, small sedan. There were hardly any other cars on the road. An endless desert stretched as far as the eye could see in every direction. Suddenly, my mom just gasped, and we all smelled that old familiar smell. "We have a visitor," my mother said calmly. The smell wafted through the air for a few miles, filling the entire consciousness. My head filled with thoughts of my grandfather, and I began to feel an icy cold breeze, even despite the horrendous weather. After a while, the smell dissipated and the climate returned to obscene hotness. This marked the only time to date I've been visited by my grandfather. Other family members have reported him multiple times afterwards, even as recently as this year. It's for me. The time I knew I was getting a call about an emergency before I even answered. I was working at Starbucks, and I was about 15 minutes into my shift. I remember being in a really great mood. Right before leaving for work, my husband and a roommate were heading out the door to walk to a gas station about a block away. While I'm making drinks, I hear the store phone ring across the room. I immediately look over to my coworker as she answers it because I know it's for me. We usually don't get a lot of calls in our store, especially not personal calls. I'd never had a personal call in the store either. There was no reason at all for me to think whoever was calling was trying to reach me. But I'd always sort of remember knowing that something else was wrong. So right after answering the call, my coworker looked up and locked eyes with me, since I was already staring right at her, which was creepy, so at the moment I just smiled to try to calm her down. I don't think it helped when I said, "It's for me." Someone stepped in for me, and I came over quickly. It was my roommate, and the first thing he said was something along the lines of, "First, I need you to stay calm." I said, "I'm calm. What happened?" Because since I had already known something was wrong before I answered, I didn't have any rush of panic, which is great because I already had bad anxiety. I also somehow didn't feel scared of what it was going to be like. Like, I already knew it was something that would pass. But anyway, he explained that while crossing the street, a huge pickup truck had run a light and hit both of them while trying to turn on the red. My roommate was a big guy, so he immediately caught the driver's attention and only stumbled before the driver hit the brakes. My significantly smaller husband was thrown to the ground, badly injured from the impact. He said that they were already in an ambulance. Thank God for a wonderful roommate, basically insisting that he needed to go with them to the hospital so he could let him and his wife and family know what all had happened. By then, he was still hurting. But he was joking around with the paramedics, and he's pretty optimistic about everything. They insisted he was all right and didn't need me there, which again I somehow knew before they even told me. I thanked them for the call, told my husband I loved him, and joked with him a little bit, and then I got back to work. Of course, I proceeded to tell my coworkers what happened, still casual and smiling. They, of course, freaked out, and the supervisor asked if I wanted to leave to go to him. I wasn't worried or stressed or anything, and I just said I was fine to stay, and I just treated it like a crazy start to the day. I'm positive it'll, sort of probably came off as like a setup for getting the day off until I rejected the offer, especially with how obvious it was that I knew the call was for me, but basically fine now after some long physical therapy that goes for walks for the same gas station, with a slightly altered route. I don't mind this kind of foresight if it's going to keep me from another anxiety attack. A visit to the Grand Canyon Hotel in Arizona. So as mentioned above, I went to the Grand Canyon Hotel in Williams, Arizona. I was at a rest stop before heading to the Grand Canyon via the Grand Canyon Railway the following morning. We chose the hotel because it was cheap, and it was also said that the oldest hotel in Arizona was that. And at first sight, it was a beautiful hotel. The lobby was decorated with historical memorabilia and foreign currencies gifted by previous customers. After checking in, the front desk told us to check out the room and see which one we wanted to use. As we walked up the stairs, we were greeted by an old picture of an old lady. Judging from it, it looked like something from the late 19th century or early 20th. We were checking out the different rooms when my friend told me she felt like something tapped her on the shoulder. I joked around saying it was a ghost. Normally I'm pretty much a paranoid mess, you'd say, but on this night, I just wanted to rest after driving all the way from LA and super excited for the next day. I chose a room next to a hallway, and if you search for the hotel on Expedia or some other travel site, it's a room with a sailor uniform in it, like a real sailor uniform from the war. At midnight, I went to bed. Didn't have any paranoid thoughts. Went to bed peacefully, in fact. Then at around 1 in the morning, I hear footsteps. I hear footsteps outside my room. I'm thinking it's the neighbor's guests or something. I try to go back to sleep, then the footsteps reappear. And this time in my room. I'm terrified at this point. Open my eyes, sit up on my bed. Silence. So I go back to sleep. I should also mention that the bed that I was sleeping on was an extremely soft bed. If you sat down on the left side of the bed, I would completely roll over to your side. So I was sleeping once more, then the footsteps came back, and again in my room. Except this time it sounded like it was running around. Terrified, I keep my eyes closed. My arms start to go up and down on the bed, and there's something walking on my bed. After hesitating, I open my eyes. Right in front of my eyes were two extremely pale butt cheeks. My head between the legs. They were small. It was obviously a child's ass. Couldn't tell which gender the body belonged to, but it was very much a child's pale blue ass. Then I closed my eyes once more, heart beating faster than it's ever been. Then I opened my eyes and it's gone. After a few minutes of silence, I reached for my phone and watched some of The Office to cheer me up. Go to bed at around 6 in the morning. I talked to the front desk in the morning. I said there's no reports of ghosts in the hotel. If any of you have ever visited the hotel and have been visited by something or someone, please let me know. This was my very first haunting, and I want to know more about the child that visited me in the middle of the night. I was always skeptical of the paranormal. Now I'm a firm believer. What a weird first ghost to have witnessed. Reply to negative inches about ghost in Grand Canyon Hotel, Williams, Arizona. I stayed in this hotel, and yet we had a strange experience. I'm from Australia, and the person I was with is originally from New York. We were on a very loosely planned last-minute road trip. We were just enjoying each other's company, and pretty much just using the open road, seeing the sights, stopping all over, wherever we needed to do, and seeing what we wanted to see. Similar to the original post, we had arrived at the end of the day. We had driven from Las Vegas. No real plans to stop at Williams. No reason to. Not even sure why we did. It was sort of a blip on the map. This was 2011. My suggestion was always to look to the center of town to find somewhere historical or significant to stay. We arrived around early dinner time. Went in, the place seemed deserted. We stood chatting in the lobby, looking at historical photos and paraphernalia. A couple sort of emerged from behind the desk and showed us upstairs. The hallway had all these old sepia photos of people that bulged out of the frame. I must admit it was mildly creepy, but only for a moment. The adventurous feelings of finding the nostalgic place sort of overrode the creepiness. There were different rooms. The nautical-themed one seemed the nicest. I wanted a street window room. Sounds stupid, but I both wanted natural light and being able to see the car on the side street below. We ended up in the honeymoon room or something like that. It also had a nice ensuite. The room had an old wedding dress hanging on the wall next to the bed. Yeah, it was pretty creepy. The woman told us that it was inside a chest that they found in the desert. My friend and I glanced at each other when she said that I raised our eyebrows. But again, didn't think too much about it. After booking in, we walked up the street to a rock and roll hot rod style diner and had a meal. Upon returning, my friend said that she didn't like the old dress hanging on the wall, so I carefully hung it in the cupboard that was between the ensuite and the door to the room. It was a bit off-putting, and the first thing your eyes to see when you went into the room anyway. There was also a pair of long white debutante-type gloves hanging over a little shelf on the other side of the bed, up above the radiator. The warm air from the radiator below made the fingers move. It was late November and pretty cold. All the gloves were moving due to the heat from the radiator, so it was more funny than creepy. I went to sleep, and then at around 3 a.m. I was woken by creaking floorboards near the door. The sort of thing where I would normally just check in to the sound in my mind, listen for a minute without opening my eyes and go back to sleep. The floors were creaky, so I thought it was just another guest that had booked in. Then I realized the creaking and shuffling sounded more like it was inside the room, not out in the hall. I could feel my friend in the bed next to me, so it wasn't going to be her going to the bathroom. I opened my eyes and lifted my head to see if somebody else was in the room. I didn't see anything. It was weird. I lay there listening, but I drifted off, relegating the sound to being an old building and me being half asleep. About an hour or so later woke me again. This time, the creaking sounded like actual footsteps walking across the room toward the bedside. It sort of repeated a couple of times as I was waking up. No mistaking it. I lay there still for a moment, gathering my thoughts, thinking there's someone in the room and that I needed to take action. My friend had obviously woken too and nudged me as if to say, "Did you hear that?" I quickly sprang up and peered around the room. There was nothing, but it definitely sounded like somebody had walked across the room and stood next to the bed, went back towards the door and then back to the bed again. Coincidentally, the path of the steps was from over near the door, next to the cupboard where the wedding dress crossed the side of the bed where the wedding dress had been hanging. It was very clear and almost like you could feel someone standing next to the bed. I switched on the lights, checked the door, went to the toilet while I was up, and kind of walked around the room. This was sort of an effort to make my friend feel safe, show her that everything's okay. Basically stayed awake for the next hour and a half, maybe dozing lightly, then getting up at some point around 6. Having dozed a little bit more deeply for a little while more, the morning light made the room feel a little bit less ominous. We mentioned it to the people the next morning as we checked out, and they just looked at us blankly, not really engaging in the subject. They weren't rude, just kind of awkward. We then went and had some breakfast at the Snowboarder Cafe back at the road near the diner, recounted the events, and both agreeing that something unexplainable had happened. Not sure if the wedding dress really had anything to do with it or not, but it was definitely hard to explain away as nothing. We both felt it wasn't random old building noises. So yes, there's something weird about the place. To follow up with this, we didn't learn our lesson. Next night we ended up checking into the Monte Vista in Flagstaff. Ended up not staying there the whole night. I have more and more frequently been seeing tall, pitch-black figures. The very first time I ever saw these things, I was around 6 or 7. My family was camping at some lake in Oklahoma. I saw 2 strange figures standing outside our camper alone, and I saw a ghostly white figure. It looked like a preteen girl with long hair and a gown, running into the woods chased by a tall, thin black figure. I froze, called for my dad, who went to the woods where I saw these, but he saw no footprints or anything. I moved to a rural property in 2015. It's definitely my home. It's my home. In January of 2016, at age 11, I was standing outside and just kind of staring out at the trees on the property. I was doing this for a solid 3 seconds. I made eye contact with this abnormally tall, emaciated, pitch-black humanoid. I used quotations around eye contact, seeing it had no eyes. It was hanging upside down by its knees from a tree branch. Its long arms were touching the ground. If I had to guess, I'd say it was around 7 to 10 feet tall, maybe. I felt a deep sense of dread, ran inside to tell my father. When he came back out a few seconds later, it was just gone. I hadn't started seeing them again until recently, starting in September. On September 28th, my boyfriend, brother, and I were down the road from my house trying to catch fish at the bridge. I got bored and uncomfortable because there were gnats, so I started walking up the road back to my house. I was about halfway there when I saw the figure standing in the center of the road. I froze. It froze. It stood there for about a minute or two. It was around 9 feet tall, and its hands nearly touched the ground. I ran back to the bridge, waited to walk back to my brother and my boyfriend. I didn't speak for a solid 2 hours. 2 days ago, I was closing the blinds to a window my cat enjoys perching at. And it was staring straight outside the window, and it had its face inches from the glass. It opened its mouth, and I don't know why. This one had a mouth, the other one didn't, but in its mouth was a big bulging eye. I freaked the fuck out and curled up in my bed. Today I saw it peeking around a corner in my living room. I'm terrified. Anybody know anything about this? What the fuck did I witness? I live in Pennsylvania. There's a creepy house called Remeyer's Hollow. That's where a murder took place in 1928. I'll post the Wikipedia page if you want to read up on it. On one afternoon, I was hanging out with 2 of my friends, and we pretty much weren't really doing anything. This was 4 years ago. We were bored teenagers. So I mentioned checking out that house, and they never heard about it, so once they heard the backstory about it, they were down to visit it. When we got there, it was pretty light out. It was maybe an hour away from us, and we looked around, imagining wherever, all these things took place, just talking about the history of it. And if you're from Pennsylvania, and if you know this place, that they sort of up security over over the years, and especially now, so we're being respectful, just admiring the property. Once we decided to leave, my friend sort of backed out and went the wrong way. He ended up coming to a dead end, and he had backed up into someone's driveway. I was in the back seat, and he had my head looking out the back window to make sure he was all good, and out of nowhere I saw this woman, long black hair, piercing black eyes, and a white dress, staring at me. They were keeping eye contact in the doorway of this house. I turned around, freaking out, with tears in my eyes. Looked back, and there was no one there. I had to look away for only 2 seconds. My friend was backing up, told me he didn't see anything. My other friend was looking down at his phone, and he clearly didn't see anything either. I somehow was the only one who witnessed her. Never felt fear like that before. The way she was looking at me will never leave my mind. I don't know if I saw a creepy woman or if I saw something paranormal, but whatever it was still haunts me to this day after years. Kids and animals. My dad passed away the night before I began my senior year of college. I obviously missed the first week and nothing was the same. Lost a friend, confidant, advisor. 7 months later, my girlfriend had to learn that she was pregnant. One of the first things she said to me was, "We're going to be okay, we're just bringing back part of what you lost." This was wildly helpful and comforting since I was 22 and never had a baby before. And as an only child with an uncle that never had kids or cousins that only sort of lived like 8 hours away. So shortly after we found out at school, our puppy started to bark softly at my desk. The desk happened to be the last thing my dad and I put together the day he died before we got dinner. Suddenly there was a crash, something falling in the corner which sent the dog into a state of constant barking. Not just I think I heard something bark. She had, done that before. This was a new kind. Waking up in the morning, I saw this box of binder clips on the floor. There is no way they moved from the position they were in when I went to bed. They were firmly in the desk, not near the edge. Several years went by, and my daughter was about 2, playing in my mom's house on a visit. I was talking to her, and all of a sudden my daughter poked her head around the kitchen, waved, and said, "Hi, Joey." My mom and girlfriend looked away at her and asked, "What'd you just say?" She'd never heard the name or any of us talk about my dad before, but she was saying hi to him, and her response was just saying hi, like innocently without a clue. Later that year, visiting my girlfriend's parents, we slept there one cold New England night and a lot of property. They let people keep horses in one of the areas that was penned in. One of the horses had died earlier that day, and late night our daughter wanted to get in bed, and the wind was just howling. So she gave us each a kiss. She gave each of us a kiss and said goodnight. It sent a chill through me, because she said, "Goodnight, horsey ghost." Again, she didn't see this horse, had died or been back to see us since the winter. 2 of us in the darkness, lit only by moon outside the window, like we all both just mouthed "what the fuck" to each other. And this has continued throughout her life, occasionally asking me for certain things that have only meaning to my dad and stories that he would tell, using certain words and phrases and playing with toys that she'll occasionally be talking to Joey. At 10, I'm starting to wonder if she truly might have taken his place in this world, or just has this subconscious connection. Could she be a potential empath, since she's wildly emotional at times? I don't know nearly enough to know if I'm even in the right realm there. Could it just be that she has a pure soul and certain things are revealed to her? They are everywhere. Not sure if this is just me, but no matter what time, place, who I'm with, sober or fucked up, the shadow people casually walk around Earth. They're not fully opaque. It's like a fuzzy haze and an outline of a person. Imagine a silhouette of energy. First time I started to see them was when I was around 14, and I'd go out of my house, go to the shed, and I'd smoke cigarettes. I would see them walk past me. They'd go down the road, just walk around. At the time, I called them wanderers. I think shadow people is a better fit. One time stands out more to me when I was outside, smoking weed and cigarettes by myself behind the shed. I turned around to face the shed, and I see one of them peering around the corner right into my eyes. There were hands and fingers that were curled around the corner, and in the middle was a clear head. No facial features, but staring right at me. We made, quote-unquote eye contact for 10-15 seconds before it slowly creeps back around the shed out of sight. I've never really had a fear of them at any point, even that last one, though they would give me a slight spook walking down the road in the dark just to come face to face with one. But letting go of the worry of making too long of a post, I'll tell the one time I actually felt scared of one. I was inside sitting on my couch. I don't entirely remember, but I was probably only high on weed, and from my seat I can see perfectly into this one room. This one room I've always kind of had a spook from, like a dark open closet door at night. This time I look up and see one, but not like I've ever seen previously. This one was a child, or at least a child's height. It wasn't partly translucent like the others. Standing in the doorway, clear as can be, was a fully opaque silhouette of fuzzy, tense energy. 2 dark pits where its eyes are supposed to be. I'm sitting there staring at it, and it's staring at me, and we hold. We probably held our gazes together for about 1 or 2 minutes, but I swear it felt like the longest time I've ever held in that seat. As it glares back at my whole body, it's filled with every negative emotion my body can process, and that's apparently a surprisingly large amount. Fear, loathing, wrath, sadness, hopelessness, confusion, everything horrifying and terrifying that's ever happened in this existence. Every great tragedy, genocide, shooting, and just every general fucked up shit in life. A full, deep, detailed understanding of these rushed through my head down to my torso, then down into my arms and legs, all while looking at what might have been something a little or a lot more like a wanderer or shadow person. Sitting there, scared shitless, slowly walked down my steps and is gone. I haven't seen it since, but I will say that I'm on the border between wanting to and not wanting to encounter it again. They're all still everywhere to this day.